Everyone in my small, snowy town in Alaska envied me. They said my mother, who ran off to New York City years ago, was like my Cinderella fairy godmother. Every month, she would mail me these package boxes filled with trendy gifts. Cute floral dresses, brand new backpacks, smartwatches. My Grandma Eleanor would always hug me and say, "You have to study hard, Chloe. Show her your gratitude when you grow up. She's working 3 jobs, surviving on pennies in that giant city just to send you these. It's hard on her." So I studied until my eyes bled. Finally, I got a full-ride academic scholarship to Columbia University. I wanted to tell my mother the amazing news in person. I saved every single penny of my local scholarship money and bought a one-way ticket to New York. On the flight, I pictured our reunion 1,000 times. I would hug her tight, tell her I was all grown up, and promise her she didn't have to work so hard anymore. It was my turn to take care of her. The moment the plane touched down at JFK, I immediately called her. There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line before she finally spoke, her voice cold and distant. "You shouldn't have come, Chloe. I've remarried. My husband is a portfolio manager on Wall Street. Our daughter, Sophia, is about to attend Stanford. She's brilliant, beautiful, and the light of our lives. They don't know I have another daughter." I stood in the chaotic arrivals terminal, watching the crowd surge past me. People were hugging, kissing, crying, and throwing themselves into their mother's arms. But my mother's words just kept looping in my head like a broken record. "You shouldn't have come. They don't know I have another daughter." It turned out I was nothing but a dirty stain on her perfect new life. Something to be hidden away. This was my first time ever boarding a plane. When the flight took off from Anchorage, my heart had been beating so fast with excitement. When I was only 2 years old, my mother fled our home to escape my abusive father. She dumped me at Grandma Eleanor's cabin and boarded a one-way flight to New York. I hadn't seen her face since. Once I messaged her, "Mom, can you send me a picture of you? Just one?" Maybe she didn't see it, or maybe she was too busy. She sent plenty of expensive gadgets that the kids in my town had never seen, but never a single photograph of herself. I did the math. 16 years. I hadn't seen my mother in 16 long years. I had fantasized about what she looked like now. Had she lost weight? Was her hair blonde or brunette? Were her hands calloused from years of hard work? I thought she would be waiting at the gate, holding a cardboard sign with my name on it. I thought she would wrap me in a hug that would make up for lost time. During the 8-hour flight, I hadn't slept for a single second. The middle-aged woman sitting next to me had smiled and asked, "Heading to the big city all by yourself, sweetie?" I had smiled so wide my eyes crinkled. "My mom is waiting for me." "How lovely," she said, patting my hand. "A mother-daughter reunion is the best thing in the world." I had squeezed the container of cinnamon rolls in my lap. My mom had mentioned in a phone call years ago how much she missed the taste of Grandma's homemade cinnamon rolls. The sweet scent of cinnamon was still drifting up from the box, but suddenly, I felt completely lost. Yeah, I had been so excited. How did it turn out like this? I sent her my live location on Snapchat. "Mom, can we just meet for 5 minutes? I won't ruin anything for you, I promise. Please." No reply. I waited in the terminal for 1 hour. Then 2. Every time a woman with styled hair walked past, I gasped and looked up. None of them were her. My phone battery was down to 5%. I clutched it like a lifeline. Finally, a text popped up on Snapchat. "Chloe, please just go back home. Be a good girl, okay? Today is Sophia's birthday. We are hosting a huge family party for her. It's just not convenient for you to be here. Maybe next time, okay?" Next time? For 16 years, my mother had promised me countless next times. Next time she would visit. Next time we would hang out. Next time she would buy me something nice. And for the promise of this next time, I had flown thousands of miles, only to find out it was all a joke. I didn't leave immediately. I searched for the earliest flight back to Alaska, desperate to escape the city that had thoroughly humiliated me. But there were no flights available until the next day. I had to stay here. I found a quiet corner near the baggage claim, pulled my knees to my chest, and curled into a ball. When I was a kid and the other neighborhood kids bullied me, calling me an abandoned orphan, I used to curl up in a corner just like this. I pretended that if I made myself small enough, I couldn't hear their insults or feel their fists. An hour later, a family walked out of the VIP exit. I glanced at them casually, looked away, and then froze. My gaze snapped back. The woman was wearing a designer cashmere coat, carrying a Birkin bag I only recognized from magazines, and her hair was styled in perfect, glossy waves. She looked like a high society elite. Walking next to her was a teenage girl who was clinging to her arm, whining playfully, "Mom, I'm starving." The woman smiled warmly, smoothing the girl's hair. "I booked a table at that Michelin-starred French restaurant you've been dying to try since last year. Happy birthday, sweetie." They walked right past me. No one noticed the pathetic girl curled up in the corner. But I recognized her. Her smile was exactly how Grandma Eleanor had described it. Her eyes turned into perfect crescents when she laughed, and she had a tiny mole right at the corner of her lip. I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering, and followed them from a distance. I watched as my mother guided Sophia toward a sleek, black Porsche Cayenne. The trunk popped open, and it was filled with birthday surprises. Balloons, designer shopping bags, and a massive, beautifully decorated cake box. Sophia squealed with joy, jumping into my mother's arms and kissing her cheek. I looked down at the container of cinnamon rolls in my hands. Slowly, I opened the lid, pulled one out, and stuffed it into my mouth. It tasted like ash. She was eating at Michelin-starred restaurants now. She wouldn't even look at Grandma's stale cinnamon rolls. Just like she wouldn't look at me. I threw the rest of the box into the trash can. My phone buzzed. Samantha Miller has sent you $50,000 via Venmo. Samantha. Chloe, I'm so sorry. This money should cover your college tuition and expenses. Please don't come back here. I stared at the screen for a long time. My mind automatically started calculating. After getting my acceptance letter to Columbia with a full ride, the school had also granted me a generous stipend. I had saved enough to cover my living expenses, and even send some back to Grandma. But that wasn't all. Ever since my freshman year of high school, I had worked multiple part-time jobs, tutoring rich kids in town. I saved every penny. I had even bought a beautiful sterling silver bracelet as a gift for my mom. I had come all this way with a heart full of hope, only to be paid off with $50,000 to get lost. A bitter taste filled my mouth. I finally understood why she hadn't come back for 16 years. But I still couldn't accept it. I sat on the cold airport bench all night. A janitor holding a mop asked me in English why I wasn't going home. I struggled to find the words, my throat tight. I'm waiting for someone, I whispered. I was waiting for someone who was never going to show up. When the sun rose, I boarded my flight back. Before stepping onto the plane, I took one last look at the gray New York skyline. I made a silent vow to myself. I would do exactly what she wanted. I would never look for her again. But I would make sure she remembered exactly what kind of daughter she had thrown away. One day, I would stand at a height she could never dream of reaching. After returning to my dorm, I called Grandma Eleanor. When she picked up, I could hear another line ringing in the background. It was the landline back at the cabin, the one that usually only rang on holidays. The old landline had a terrible speaker, and the audio leaked loudly. Eleanor, how many times do I have to tell you? Keep Chloe away from me. I worked so hard to get rid of that baggage. What are you trying to do, ruin my life? I told you to put her up for adoption back then, but you wouldn't listen. Now she's tracking me down like a psycho. Grandma Eleanor must have realized I could hear. She whispered hurriedly into the receiver, Samantha, stop it. Don't say that. I don't care. If you want to keep that anchor dragging you down, fine. But keep her on a leash. If she ruins the life I built here, I swear I'll drag us both down. Grandma slammed the phone down. Chloe, sweetie, your mom didn't mean that, Grandma said, her voice shaking on our FaceTime call. I forced a tight smile. It's okay, Grandma. I'm sorry I couldn't bring you anything from New York. Grandma opened her mouth to speak, but shut it. Instead, she pointed her camera at a freshly baked apple pie on her counter. Eat well at school, okay? Focus on your classes. I will. After hanging up, I went to the closet and pulled out the box containing every single gift my mother had sent me over the years. I examined them one by one. Now I realized these weren't gifts bought with hard-earned savings like Grandma had thought. The iPad I had cherished? It had a tiny laser-engraved name on the back that had been partially buffed out. Sophia. The beautiful floral dress I was always too afraid to wear, because I didn't want to ruin it. The tag inside was a size 4. I was a size 0. Even the ice skates that all my classmates envied were 2 sizes too small. When I was younger, I was so vain. I would jam my feet into those skates, ignoring the pain just to show them off. Looking back, every single piece of maternal love I had received was just Sophia's trash. I was like a street beggar, collecting someone else's garbage and treating it like treasure. I dragged the box to the dumpster and threw everything inside. Then I looked up at the moon. Did she see the same moon in New York? From that day on, I stopped wishing on stars. I would be my own god. For the next 3 years, I didn't take a single day off. I drowned myself in my studies. I cleared all my credits a year early, graduated top of my class with a double major in finance and corporate law from Columbia, and landed an internship at a top-tier Wall Street investment bank during my junior year. My starting salary was $150,000 a year. By my second year postgrad, I poached a massive client and jumped to a prestigious private equity fund as a senior investment manager. A journalist from the Columbia Alumni Daily once interviewed me, asking what drove my insane work ethic. I pulled out a cheap stylus pen from my bag, the one piece of Sophia's junk I had secretly retrieved from the dumpster years ago. At first, I just wanted to own something that actually had my name engraved on it, I said. I wanted to prove that I deserved something brand new. The journalist didn't fully understand, but she wrote it down anyway. In my 3rd year, My firm appointed me to lead our delegation at the Global Financial Summit. Chloe, my managing director told me, patting my shoulder. You are the youngest senior manager in our firm's history. The biggest players in the world will be listening to your keynote presentation. Make us proud. When I saw the summit venue, my hands started to shake. I had waited 5 years for this day. Actually, much longer than 5 years. I suddenly remembered my 5th grade parent-teacher conference. My desk was the only one in the classroom that sat empty. My classmates whispered and pointed at me all afternoon. I cried until my chest ached. When I got home, I begged Grandma to call my mom. I wanted to ask her when she was coming home, and if she could make it for my 6th grade graduation. Grandma hesitated before dialing the international number. The phone rang for a long time. But before I could even say hi, Mom, the line went dead. My mother's parting words from 5 years ago echoed in my mind again. My husband is a portfolio manager on Wall Street. Our daughter, Sophia, is about to attend Stanford. I scanned the summit's VIP guest list, and sure enough, I saw Samantha Miller and Sophia Miller listed as guests of James Miller. James was attending as a mid-level representative. At 40-something, he was at the same corporate tier as me, except his portfolio performance wasn't nearly as impressive. For the past 5 years, I had slept less than 5 hours a night. I memorized every financial regulation, every market trend, and every client's personal preferences. My clients worshipped me. Many of them swore that wherever I went, their multi-million-dollar funds would follow. That was how a 23-year-old girl from Alaska was now standing in a room full of Wall Street titans. On the 3rd night of the summit, a private gala was held at the Stanford Faculty Club. I wore a sleek, custom-tailored black silk evening gown with 3-inch Saint Laurent heels, walking into the grand hall alongside some of the biggest names in venture capital. The gown was bought with my first major performance bonus. It was hand-tailored and my initials, CV, were delicately embroidered with gold thread inside the collar. In the center of the ballroom, I spotted my mother. She looked a bit older than she had 5 years ago, but she was still draped in expensive jewelry, wearing a practiced high-society smile. Sophia was by her side, laughing with a group of wealthy trust fund kids. Holding a glass of champagne, I glided through the crowd, walking right past them. Suddenly, my mother's eyes locked onto me. Her face turned instantly pale. What are you doing here? She grabbed my wrist, her grip tight and panicked, trying to drag me toward the exit. I don't know how you managed to sneak in here, but you need to leave right now. Don't ruin my life. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. My years in corporate finance had taught me how to handle wild dogs and screaming clients alike. Just smile. Chloe, speak to me, she hissed. Her aggressive movements began to draw attention. A few nearby guests looked over, whispering. Sophia immediately stepped up like a protective guard dog, glaring at me. My mother glanced at the gathering crowd, panicked. Then she pointed at me and raised her voice. This girl is a thief. She just stole my diamond necklace. I was just trying to convince her to hand it back quietly. A collective gasp went through the crowd. I could feel the disgusted, judgmental glares locking onto me. Someone quickly called for security. Wait! Seeing the security guards approach, my mother seemed to realize she had gone too far. She's just a kid. As long as she gives the necklace back, we don't need to involve the police. But before she could finish, Sophia stepped forward, swung her arm, and delivered a harsh slap across my face. Smack. You thief. Give my mom her necklace back. I touched my stinging cheek, stunned by how viciously arrogant my mother's golden child was. But strangely, the heavy weight that had suffocated my chest for years suddenly vanished. Is this it? Is this the perfect family she abandoned me for? I let out a cold laugh. Just then the overhead speakers announced my name. And now please welcome our keynote speaker, Senior Portfolio Manager of Vanguard Holdings, Chloe Vance. I smoothed down my dress. But as I turned to walk toward the stage, Sophia grabbed my skirt. You're not going anywhere until you give it back. Let go of her. The security guards tried to intervene, but the crowd had surrounded us, murmuring in multiple languages. It was giving me a headache. A cold smirk played on my lips. Before I could say anything, the event director pushed through the crowd. Miss Vance, you're on in 30 seconds. The stage is ready. Ignoring my frozen mother, I shook Sophia's hand off my dress and walked past them. Stepping onto the stage under the glittering spotlight, I adjusted the microphone, looked down at the shocked woman in the crowd, and began to speak. Good evening, everyone. Before we dive into the Q3 market projections, I'd like to share a quick story. It's a story about a girl who was abandoned by her mother, and how she fought her way to this very stage. Below the stage, my mother's face drained of all color. The microphone hummed softly through the auditorium. Behind me, the 5-story digital display showed the Vanguard Holdings emblem in navy and gold, hovering above the title of the keynote, Asymmetric Risk and the Architecture of Conviction. Below the stage, 700 of the most influential fund managers, university deans, and institutional allocators sat in velvet cushioned seats. In the fourth row, centered directly beneath the primary chandelier, stood Samantha Miller. Her hand was still clamped over her mouth. Her eyes, lined with expensive charcoal pencil, were wide and bloodshot, frozen on the giant display above my head where my full name and title were projected in 4-foot-tall letters. Chloe Vance, Managing Director of Quantitative Equity and Special Situations. Next to her, Sophia stood slack-jawed, her hand still raised in the air as if the muscle memory of slapping me hadn't quite faded. And standing just behind them was James Miller. James had his phone out, presumably checking the livestream feed or looking at the event itinerary he hadn't bothered to read beforehand. His face had gone from an olive tan to the color of wet sidewalk cement. His tie was crooked. I didn't adjust my posture. I didn't reach up to touch my cheek, where the red imprint of Sophia's fingers still burned. Instead, I looked straight into the camera mounted at the center of the press balcony and began to speak. In private equity, I said, my voice carrying cleanly across the hall through the surround sound system, we are taught to look at balance sheets as mirrors of character. We look at liquidity, we look at liabilities, and most importantly, we look at provenance. Where did the capital come from? What was sacrificed to produce the yield? I paused, letting the silence settle into the room like heavy snow. 21 years ago, in a valley north of Fairbanks, a woman decided that the liabilities on her balance sheet were too high. She had an abusive husband, no savings, and a 2-year-old child. So she liquidated her risk. She got on an Alaska Airlines flight with a one-way ticket, left the 2-year-old in a cabin with a wood-burning stove and an aging grandmother, and came to Manhattan. A quiet rustle went through the front rows. Someone in the back cleared their throat. For 16 years, I continued, pacing slowly toward the left edge of the stage. That woman sent boxes back to that snowy valley. She sent discarded clothes, second-hand electronics with another child's name scratched into the casing, and promises. She told the people in that small town that she was working 3 shifts a day, cleaning floors and skipping meals, all to give her daughter a future. In the 4th row, Samantha took an involuntary step backward. Her high heel caught on the edge of the carpet runner. James didn't reach out to steady her. He was staring at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dry dock. The girl in that valley believed every word I said, my voice dropping an octave, steady and resonant. She studied under kerosene lamps when the power lines went down in 40 below blizzards. She memorized every tax code, every discounted cash flow model, and every risk parameter because she thought her mother was bleeding in the city to pay for her dream. She thought she owed a debt that could never be repaid. I stopped at the podium and looked directly at Sophia. 5 years ago, that girl arrived at JFK with a full scholarship to Columbia and a box of warm cinnamon rolls her grandmother had baked at 4 in the morning. She called her mother from the terminal. The room was so quiet you could hear the air handlers humming in the ceiling. Her mother's answer was 48 words long. The most important ones were, "They don't know I have another daughter. Today is Sophia's birthday. It's just not convenient for you to be here." A collective intake of breath echoed through the faculty club. Several older women in the Stanford donor section turned their heads, their gaze traveling with laser precision toward the Miller family. Then she sent $50,000 on Venmo, I said, smiling faintly at the front row. A severance package for 16 years of abandonment. I clicked the remote in my palm. The slide behind me changed. It wasn't a financial chart. It was a high-resolution photograph of the Venmo transaction from 5 years ago. Samantha Miller sent $50,000. Note: Chloe, I'm so sorry. Please don't come back here. Beside it was the transaction receipt from 12 minutes ago, generated from my private banking portal on my phone right before I walked onto the stage. Chloe Vance sent $67,842.19 to Samantha Miller. Note: principal plus 5%. Compounding annual interest. Account closed. In institutional finance, I concluded, turning back to the podium and bringing up the actual macroeconomic slide deck, we call that settling the books. When a debtor repays the capital with interest, the relationship is formally dissolved. There is no moral claim left to negotiate. I set my clicker on the walnut surface, straightened my cuff, and looked at the panel of sovereign wealth directors in the front row. Now, let us examine Vanguard's third-quarter allocation strategies for emerging market debt. For the next 40 minutes, I didn't look at Samantha once. I delivered the presentation with the ruthless, clockwork precision that had made me the youngest partner track manager in my firm's history. I broke down foreign exchange volatility, dissected municipal bond yields, and forecasted private credit spreads with absolute authority. When I finished, there was a beat of stunned silence. Then Marcus Sterling, the chief investment officer of the California Public Employees Retirement System, a man who controlled $400 billion of pension capital, stood up from his seat in the front row. He didn't just clap, he raised both hands above his head and began an ovation that spread through the room like a brushfire. 700 people rose to their feet. In the center of the standing crowd, the Millers were the only ones who remained, frozen, trapped like insects in amber under the glare of 800,000 watts of stage lighting. The green room behind the main auditorium was quiet, insulated by 3 inches of solid oak and heavy soundproof velvet. I sat on a leather sofa, holding an ice pack wrapped in a linen napkin against my left cheek. My managing director, Arthur Hayes, leaned against the dry bar, sipping a glass of club soda. He was 58, possessed the temperament of an old sea captain, and had personally interviewed me when I walked into Vanguard's offices as a 19-year-old junior intern with frostbite scars on my knuckles. The speech was magnificent, Vance, Arthur said, not looking up from his phone. The board from Yale Endowment just messaged. They're increasing their commitment to the Special Situations Fund by $40 million. Thank you, Arthur, I said quietly. One problem, though. Arthur turned around, his silver eyebrows arched. The girl who hit you. Did she break the skin? Just the pride of her mother, I replied. The heavy oak door rattled. A loud, frantic voice leaked through from the hallway. I need to speak to her. She is my daughter. You have no right to keep me out of this room. Arthur sighed, setting his glass down. Shall I call campus security, or would you like to handle the execution yourself? Let them in, I said, removing the ice pack and sitting upright. All 3 of them. Arthur stepped to the door, opened it 3 inches, and nodded to the 2 private security guards standing outside. Let the family through. Keep the hallway clear. Samantha burst through the doorway first. Her composure was completely gone. Her designer coat was unbuttoned, her hair was escaping its French pins, and the Birkin bag on her arm looked heavy, dragging her shoulder down like an anchor. Chloe, she gasped, rushing forward with her hands outstretched, her eyes swimming with tears. Chloe, sweetie, why would you do that out there? In front of all those people? Do you know what you just did to our family? I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Stay where you are, Mrs. Miller, I said, my voice level and cold. You are 6 feet away from an executive officer of the fund your husband has spent 9 months begging for an allocation. Samantha stopped as if she had run into an invisible glass wall. Behind her, James Miller walked in, his shoulders slumped, his face hollowed out by pure, unadulterated terror. He held Sophia by the wrist with a grip so tight, the girl's fingers were turning white. Sophia was crying, not the pretty, delicate tears she had shed at the airport 5 years ago, but the ugly, snot-streaked sobs of a child who had realized the playground had landmines. Chloe, James said, stepping past his wife. His voice was cracked, stripped of all the Wall Street bravado he usually wore like cheap cologne. Miss Vance, I am so sorry. I swear to God Almighty, I had no idea. Samantha told me she had no living family except an estranged aunt in Canada. She never told me she had a daughter. James, don't. Samantha cried, grabbing his arm. I did it for us. I did it so you wouldn't think I was trailer trash from the tundra. I wanted to give Sophia a clean slate. A clean slate. James tore his arm away from her with such force that Samantha stumbled against the credenza. You lied to me for 17 years. You made me look like an accomplice to child abandonment on national livestream. Every senior partner at my firm was in that room. The chairman of our compensation committee was sitting right next to me. He turned back to me, his hands trembling as he reached into his jacket. Miss Vance, regarding our fund's co-investment proposal with Vanguard. The $5 million tranche. Mr. Miller. Arthur Hayes interrupted from the bar, his tone almost conversational. Your firm's proposal was rejected 12 minutes into Miss Vance's keynote. We do not allocate institutional capital to managers whose personal due diligence is so deficient they don't even know who lives in their own house. James closed his eyes. A single, ragged shudder passed through his frame. Then he looked down at Sophia. And you, James hissed, his voice dropping into a register of pure disgust. You slapped her. In a room full of federal judges and university trustees. You accused the keynote speaker of stealing a necklace that was sitting in your mother's purse the entire time. Dad. Sophia choked out, her knees trembling. I didn't know. Mom said she was a thief. Mom told me she was a stalker who was trying to extort us. I have the security footage. A calm voice announced from the open doorway. The chief of Stanford campus police stepped into the room, holding a tablet with a time-stamped video loop playing on the screen. At 7:42 p.m., the officer said, showing the screen to Arthur Hayes, Miss Sophia Miller approached Miss Chloe Vance near the Champagne station. At 7:43 p.m. Miss Miller delivered an open-palmed strike to Miss Vance's left zygomatic arch. accompanied by loud verbal accusations of grand larceny. The incident was witnessed by 38 credentialed attendees and captured on 3 separate 4K security feeds. The officer looked at me. Miss Vance, under California Penal Code Section 242, this constitutes battery on private institutional property. Do you wish to press charges? No, Samantha shrieked, dropping to her knees on the Persian rug, her expensive cashmere skirt pooling in the dust. She crawled forward 2 feet, grabbing the hem of my sofa. Chloe, please. She's your sister. She's only 20. If she gets an assault record, Stanford will expel her. Her degree, her summer internships, her whole life will be over. I looked down at the woman on the floor. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in black, oily rivers, carving lines into her foundation. For 16 years, I had dreamed of this woman holding my hand, brushing my hair, telling me that I wasn't an accident or a mistake. Now, she was on her knees, begging me to save the girl who had worn my stolen life like a costume. She isn't my sister, I said softly. The room went completely still. My sister, I continued, looking directly at Sophia, would know that you don't raise your hand against someone who worked 14 hours a day to earn the right to stand in this room. My sister would know that when you inherit everything and build nothing, you are not royalty, you are just a squatter. I turned to the police chief. Press the charges, chief. Battery, defamation, and filing a false report. No, Sophia screamed, lunging toward the sofa, but the 2 security guards caught her by the elbows, pinning her against the wall with professional indifference. You can't do this to me. I'm Sophia Miller. I'm going to work at Goldman Sachs. Not with a misdemeanor battery conviction, you're not, Arthur Hayes murmured, taking another sip of his soda. Compliance departments are notoriously picky about violent felonies on background checks. The guards dragged Sophia out into the corridor, her hysterical wails fading down the carpeted hall toward the service elevators. James Miller stood frozen for 3 seconds, looking at his weeping wife on the floor, then at me. He didn't say another word. He turned on his heel, walked out of the room, and closed the heavy oak door behind him, leaving his wife kneeling alone in the silence. Samantha remained on the floor for a long time, her chest heaving in shallow, ragged gasps. Why? She croaked, her voice hoarse, stripped of all the cultured New York cadence she had spent 2 decades perfecting. Why couldn't you just stay in Alaska? I sent you $50,000. That was more than your father ever made in his entire miserable life. I set my teacup down on the side table. The ceramic made a sharp, distinct click against the glass. Do you know what was in the 3rd box you sent, Samantha? I asked. She blinked through her tears, dazed. What? It was November of my 7th grade year, I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. The temperature in Fairbanks had dropped to 52 below zero. The school bus had frozen axles, so I walked 3 miles through the snowdrifts to get to the post office because Grandma told me a package from New York had arrived. Samantha swallowed hard, her mouth twitching. Inside that box, I said, each word falling like an iron weight into the room, was a white down parka with a fur hood. I cried in the post office lobby. I thought, my mom knows it's cold. My mom is thinking about me. I paused, watching the memory hit her like a physical blow. When I got back to the cabin and put it on, my arms wouldn't go through the sleeves. The zipper was broken. The inner lining had been shredded by a dog. And inside the left chest pocket was a receipt from a boutique on Madison Avenue, dated 3 weeks earlier, showing that the jacket had been bought for Sophia, returned because the zipper had caught in her hair, and replaced with a brand new one. Samantha's eyes darted away, unable to hold my gaze. You didn't send me gifts, Samantha, I whispered. You used the post office as a municipal garbage disposal. Every time Sophia outgrew something, every time she stained a silk skirt or dropped an iPad on the driveway, you boxed it up and shipped it 4,000 miles north, so you wouldn't have to look at the guilt sitting in your trash bin. I thought you could use them. She stammered, her voice shaking. You had nothing up there. We had dignity, I said, standing up. Grandma Eleanor had $400 a month from grandfather's timber pension. She mended my socks with fishing line. She made me mittens out of old wool blankets. She never once looked at me like I was an inconvenience that needed to be bought off with $50 and a pack of stale biscuits. I reached into my evening clutch, pulled out a small, worn object and dropped it onto the rug in front of her knees. It was the cheap plastic stylus pen. The silver paint had flaked off years ago, showing the white plastic beneath. The laser engraving was still faintly visible under the light. SOPHIA. Keep it, I said, walking toward the private exit that led to the garage. Give it back to your daughter. Tell her that her big sister sent it from the city. Chloe. Samantha scrambled to her feet, reaching out with both hands, her fingernails scraping against the fabric of my coat. Chloe, please. James is going to divorce me. He's going to take the apartment. He's going to freeze the joint accounts. I have no money of my own. Everything is in his name. I stopped at the threshold, looking back over my shoulder. You're an experienced woman, Samantha, I said, my voice completely devoid of anger, of hatred, of anything resembling warmth. You survived 16 years in Manhattan on the illusion of wealth. I'm sure you can find 3 shifts a day, cleaning floors. After all, that's what you told Grandma you were doing all along. I stepped through the door, and the heavy security lock engaged behind me with a solide definitivitud. 2 weeks later, the Gulfstream G650 chartered by Vanguard Holdings touched down on the snow-packed runway of Fairbanks International Airport. The air outside was 28 below zero, clean, sharp, and smelling of black spruce needles and wood smoke. I wore a heavy, custom-tailored shearling coat, thick leather boots with sheepskin lining, and a simple knitted wool scarf. No gold pins, no diamond earrings, no Saint Laurent heels. A black 4-wheel drive truck was waiting on the tarmac, its engine idling to keep the heater core from freezing. The driver, a burly man named Thomas who had run the local fuel depot since I was a toddler, stepped out and touched the brim of his beaverskin hat. Afternoon, Miss Vance, he said with a wide, toothy grin. Word traveled fast. From the lower 48. Half the town watched that speech on their satellite dishes. Old Pete down at the hardware store cried so hard he dropped a crate of copper elbows. I laughed, a real, deep laugh that felt strange and wonderful in the frozen air. Is the road to the lake open, Thomas? Planted and scraped it myself this morning, he said, tossing my duffel bag into the bed of the truck. Your grandma's been baking since Tuesday. The smoke from her chimney has been smelling like brown sugar for 40 miles. The drive out to the valley took 45 minutes. The birch trees stood like white bones against the lavender winter sky. The frozen rivers were sheets of blue-tinted ice, and the mountain ridges in the distance rose into the clouds like the spine of a sleeping giant. When the truck crested the final ridge overlooking Birch Lake, I saw the cabin. It was no longer just a drafty wooden shack with plastic stapled over the window frames. Over the past 3 years, using my performance bonuses, I had quietly hired the best timberites in the state to rebuild the entire foundation. They had installed double-pane storm glass, geothermal floor heating beneath the wide plank spruce flooring, and a massive riverstone fireplace with an internal catalytic burner that kept the entire 3,000-square-foot lodge at a constant 70 degrees without a single draft. Standing on the covered cedar porch, wrapped in a red and black buffalo plaid shawl, was Grandma Eleanor. She was 76 years old. Her silver hair was tied back in a neat thick braid, her cheeks were round and red like winter apples, and her hands were tucked into the pockets of an apron she had owned since 1994. I jumped down from the truck before it had completely stopped, my boots crunching into the dry, crystalline snow. Grandma. I didn't walk. I ran, 24 years old, managing director of a multi-billion-dollar fund, running like an 8-year-old girl across the yard. With her arms wide open, Eleanor caught me. Her hug was tight, smelling of vanilla extract, dry birchwood, and clean laundry. She held the back of my head with her rough, calloused palm, pressing my cheek against her shoulder just as she had done on the night my mother vanished 16 years ago. Look at you, Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with tears that she refused to let fall onto my coat. Look at my girl. You went all the way to the edge of the world and didn't let them take a single piece of you. I brought something for you, I muttered into her neck, my own tears finally soaking into the wool of her shawl. You brought yourself, Eleanor said, pulling back to look at my face. I reached up with her thumb, gently brushing the faint, fading yellow bruise on my cheekbone. That's the only thing that ever mattered in this house. We walked inside together. The kitchen was warm, glowing with the golden light of low-hanging iron lanterns. On the heavy oak table, which I had commissioned from a local craftsman, and had engraved with Eleanor's initials beneath the pedestal, sat 4 cast iron baking pans filled with giant steaming cinnamon rolls, their cream cheese glaze melting into the swirls of dark brown sugar. I pulled out a wooden chair, sat down, and picked up a roll with my bare fingers. It was hot, sweet, and rich with real butter and mountain cinnamon. I ate the whole thing in 3 minutes, closing my eyes, letting the sugar and the warmth settle into the empty spaces of my chest. Grandma, I said, licking the glaze from my thumb. Yes, sweetie. I bought the timber rights to the entire northern ridge yesterday, I said, casually, pointing out the panoramic window toward the 4,000 acres of untouched spruce forest that surrounded the lake. No logging companies. No private developers. Just the lake, the trees, and the cabin. Eleanor paused with her wooden spoon in hand. She looked out at the mountains, then back at me, a soft, wry smile touching the corners of her mouth. How much did that cost, Chloe? Less than the respect they tried to buy from me, I replied. The winter in New York was unusually harsh that year. By January, the news from the Southern District of New York had trickled through the financial trade publications and the high society gossip columns. James Miller had filed for an emergency contested divorce within 72 hours of the Stanford Gala, because Samantha had signed a standard prenuptial agreement 17 years earlier, one that contained strict clauses regarding fraudulent disclosure of pre-existing dependents and liabilities. The family court judge had ruled almost entirely in James's favor. The $4 million pre-war cooperative apartment on Park Avenue was listed for immediate sale to satisfy James's mounting margin debts. The Porsche Cayenne was repossessed by the leasing agency after 3 missed payments. Sophia's disciplinary hearing at Stanford had concluded with a 2-year academic suspension and a mandatory referral to county court for 30 days of community service and 300 hours of anger management therapy. Her summer analyst offer at Goldman Sachs had been rescinded via a 20-word automated email from their human resources department. One Tuesday morning in mid-February, I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Vanguard building in Midtown Manhattan. The glass walls looked out over the frozen gray expanse of Central Park. On my desk sat 3 flat-panel monitors displaying live ticker data from the Tokyo and London exchanges, alongside a steaming mug of black tea. My executive assistant, Marcus, knocked twice on the glass door. Miss Vance? Yes, Marcus? There's a woman in the ground floor lobby, he said, checking his tablet with an uncomfortable expression. She doesn't have an appointment in building. Security won't issue her a visitor badge. But she's been sitting by the revolving doors since 6:30 this morning. She says her name is Samantha. I looked at the market feed on my left monitor. The S&P futures were up 14 points. What is she wearing, Marcus? Marcus hesitated. An old down coat with a torn shoulder seam. She has 2 plastic shopping bags with her. I picked up my pen, signed the quarterly risk allocation sheet in front of me, and slid the folder into the outbox. Call building management, I said evenly. Have Timky here $50 for a taxi to the Port Authority bus terminal, and tell the security desk that if she attempts to enter the elevator bank again, they are to execute a formal trespass notice. Marcus nodded. Understood, Miss Vance. He turned to leave, but stopped at the threshold. Should I tell her anything else? I looked out the window, watching a small yellow cab fight its way through the slush on 5th Avenue, 80 stories below. Tell her, I said softly, that the market is closed. That July, the midnight sun did not set over Birch Lake. At 2 in the morning, the sky was a brilliant, electric canvas of rose gold, violet, and pale turquoise reflecting off the mirror-smooth surface of the water. I sat on the end of the new cedar dock, my bare feet trailing in the cool, clear lake water. Behind me, the lights of the lodge glowed softly through the spruce trees. On the porch, Eleanor was sitting in her high-backed rocking chair, reading an old gardening catalog, her gray cat curled into a sleeping ball on her lap. My phone, resting on the wooden dock beside my knee, buzzed once. It was an email from the Columbia University Board of Trustees. Subject: confirmation of the Eleanor Vance Scholarship for Rural Scholars in Applied Economics, first cohort selected. 12 girls from small rural towns across Alaska, Montana, and North Dakota had been selected for full 4-year rides covering tuition, room, board, and a guaranteed living stipend. None of them would ever have to wear someone else's name on their clothes. None of them would ever have to beg for a photograph from across the country. I picked up a flat, smooth river stone from the edge of the dock, weighted it in my palm, and flicked my wrist. The stone skipped across the golden water. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, before vanishing into the deep, untouched center of the lake, sending ripples that expanded outward until they touched both shores. The air was warm, smelling of wild blueberries and fresh pine sap. I leaned back against the weathered cedar pilings, tilted my face up toward the endless, golden northern sky, and took a long, deep breath of the only air that had ever truly belonged to me.